On today's show, I will discuss some of the bounce back arms available in free agency and why Lucas Giolito is probably the best of the bunch.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now, on today's show, similar to our show breaking down the bounce back hitters available in free agency, I'm looking at potential starting pitchers that the Mets could sign who could return to prior form and be a really good value on the contracts you can sign to this offseason. And I want to start it off by telling you that Lucas Giolito is going to be the best option we discussed today. And when I say that, that's going to turn some people off because they saw what Giolito did after getting traded at the deadline. He was awful, but that is still a guy that has more upside than a lot of the arms we're going to discuss today. These are pitchers that are maybe a tier above that competition that you're looking at for the fifth starter spot with Tyler McGill and Joey Lucchesi and David Peterson, Jose Butto, because these are veterans. These are guys that have more MLB experience to fall back on, and some of them have some success that's not too far in the rearview mirror where maybe they can return to form. So we're going to begin with the arms that I personally don't think the Mets should go after, but if they do, I could understand it, right? Similar to what we did on the last show. So Martin Perez, 33 years old, had a great season in 2022 for the Rangers. Pitched to a 2.89 ERA, 196 in the third innings pitched, was just really awesome. This year, he fell off. 4.45 ERA, didn't stay in the rotation all year. Strikeouts were down from 7.75 in 2022, 7.75 per nine, I should say. Now they were below 6 this year, so that shows the stuff taking down pretty considerably. His career ERA is 4.44. So what he did this year was actually in line with who he's been. And he had an ERA of over 4.50 in all of the prior 5 seasons outside of that 2022 campaign. So really, it's not necessarily a down year, more a return to what he has been. Now, with that said, I mean, a guy that's going to eat some innings for you and pitch to a 4.5 ERA, the Mets could do worse. I mean, you throw him in that competition with all those guys that I mentioned in-house, he might be the best of the bunch. But that's not necessarily presenting enough upside that I'm ready to buy into it. As great as he was in 2022, I just don't think that's going to happen again. So we move on now to another pitcher who will be 33 next season, turns 33 in January, and that is Alex Wood. He had an ERA over 5 in 2022 and pitched to a 4.33 ERA this year as a swingman for the Giants. He did have a great 2021 season. That's what you can look back to and say, could he get back to that? That year he had a 3.83 ERA and over 26 starts, but I don't expect that again. This year the strikeouts fell off a cliff for him. The walks nearly doubled. That's the sign of a pitcher who has lost his stuff and is no longer able to attack the zone as effectively. And that leads to the nibbling, which ends up, causing more walks and also failing to have that pitch that can put away hitters. So Alex Wood is an arm that you could see fill a Trevor Williams type role from 2022. And there's certainly value in that. If David Stern's people love Alex Wood, maybe the Mets do sign him. But I think, again, you're better off in another direction. Then we get to Jack Flaherty. He returns to the mound after years of injuries to have a healthy season, which was great for him. He had a 4.43 ERA in 20 starts with the Cardinals, gets flipped at the deadline to the Orioles. It was awful. 6.75 ERA in 9 games, 7 starts. Not the worst flyer in the world based on his age because he's only 28, and he did have that past where he was a frontline starter. So he has sort of that alpha personality still, but that can only get you so far. And as much as you like a guy who's still willing to attack, if he's attacking with bad stuff, it's not going to lead to great results. So that confidence that he has, in some ways, it's a little bit misplaced now. Could he find it again? I think so. Of the names that we discussed so far with Martin Perez and Alex Wood, I like Jack Flaherty more just because he's younger. And he's also coming through after having the injury. So maybe with a healthy season to build on, you could get a little bit of an uptick next year. But I still don't think that Jack Flaherty, for what he might make in the market, I'm not going to say he's going to get completely paid, but is there a $6-7 million contract for him? Maybe. And when you have those options in house, I don't know if Jack Flaherty is really going to be more effective than Jose Butto next year. I'm not positive of that. And you also have the guys in the minor leagues that are coming through the ranks. So I'd still pass on Flaherty, but I could talk myself into him probably more than anyone else in this section. It's either him or Michael Lorenzen. Lorenzen, 4.18 ERA across 153 innings this season, but you really have to look at it. He had a 3.58 ERA with the Tigers and then an ERA over 5 with the Phillies. So it was really a tale of those two stops. And pitching for a team in the Tigers that were completely out of the race pretty much all year, who have that cavernous ballpark, it is a little bit easier to put up some good numbers. When he got into the race, he ultimately ended up falling out of the rotation mix entirely by the playoffs, although he did throw a no-hitter with the Phillies. So I think Lorenzen, he did his best work when he was coming out of the bullpen with the Reds, but he has turned himself into a serviceable starter. He turns 32 years old in January. He's not the worst fit. Again, it's Lorenzen, Flaherty, any of these guys in this list, they more fall into the compete for a fifth starter job. Now, if the Mets think they need that, maybe you do sign any of them because that would be an indication that they don't trust that they can get a fifth starter out of that group of Peterson, McGill, Butto, and Lucchesi. I just believe they can and don't think it's worth it to be spending on any of these guys we're talking about at the moment. But you never know. You never know what Stearns wants to do. The last name in this section is Lance Lynn, who will turn 37 next season. Here's the good when it comes to Lance Lynn. He threw over 180 innings this year. Did strike out over 9 batters per 9, so still gets his strikeouts. Was effective in that regard. Here's the bad side. 5.73 ERA in 32 starts, and he gave up 44 home runs this season. Over 2 per 9. It was 2.16 home runs per 9. Walks were up as well. Just not a great season for Lance Lynn. When you're giving up over 40 home runs, that's pretty alarming. With that said, he does still show some flashes of good stuff. I just don't know if he can keep the ball in the yard anymore. He's someone that, again, as a fifth starter, you can talk yourself into it, but I probably wouldn't. The guys that we're going to get into next, though, are arms that I think are more worthy of taking that flyer on. And then remember the final segment, after going through all of these options, I might actually be able to talk some of you into the idea of the Mets signing Lucas Giolito. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including the spread, player props, over-unders, and more. You got the NFL. You got the NBA now, where you can bet on your favorite players around the game. If you're a Knicks fan, maybe it's Jalen Brunson. You're going to take more points there. If it's Bridges for the Nets, maybe you take more points or assists or rebounds. There's a lot that you can bet on with each given game. So much fun to be had. If you want to visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, you can kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Before we discuss some free agents that are worth taking a flyer on, if you want to ask me any questions about this show today, become a Locked On Mets insider, and you're going to have the opportunity for one-on-one text communication with me. You also get text updates about the show. It's been so much fun to interact with some of the everydayers who are now Locked On Mets insiders, getting that inside scoop. If you want to join, you can find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/lockedonmets. Now let's look at some of these starting pitchers that I actually would be okay with the Mets signing this offseason because I think there's upside that is worth it. We begin with Hyun-Jin Ryu, who will turn 37 at the beginning of next year and is coming into his first full season removed from Tommy John. He got back off of TJ at the end of this year. He made 11 starts. He pitched to a 3.46 ERA, which is really respectable considering how tough it is to return midseason off of Tommy John. The expected metrics, like expected ERA, expected FIP, they predict some regression. He doesn't have incredible stuff anymore. The strikeouts weren't where they have been for him in other past seasons, but you're still looking at a guy that has a career 3.27 ERA across over 1,000 innings pitched. Some guys are just solid pitchers. I think Hyun-Jin Ryu is that. His worst year over a full season in the big leagues was a 4.37 ERA in 2021. He still pitched 169 innings that year and was worth 2.5 wins when it comes to wins above replacement. So I just look at Hyun-Jin Ryu, and I think that's an arm that has some upside to maybe not be a number 3 you love going in a playoff start, but could he be right there with Jose Quintana as far as a crafty lefty that just attacks and gets outs? Yes, and I think that could really bring a lot of value to the Mets. So I really like the idea of Ryu if the price is right. If he's going to get overpaid in this market, sort of is what it is. All right. Now we get to a massive risk or a couple of massive risks. Luis Severino, who was basically the worst pitcher in baseball this year, 6.65 ERA in 19 games, 18 of them, were starts. Strikeouts were down, walks were up. He gave up more home runs per 9 innings than Lance Lynn, 2.32 compared to Lance Lynn at 2.16. So when you're giving up an average of 2 home runs a start, even more than that, because you think about it, he's not going 9 innings all of these starts. It's probably closer to an average of 3 home runs a start. It's brutal, absolutely brutal. So why would the Mets ever consider signing Severino? Well, he still is just 29 years old, turns 30 in February. He did have an oblique strain that ended his season. It's not that that explains at all why he was so bad this year, but there was a time not too long ago in 2022 where he pitched to a 3.18 ERA and looked like a potential frontline starter again, struck out nearly 10 batters per 9. There was something there, and then he completely just fell off a cliff. His fastball was awful this year. Batters hit 349 against it. They slugged 680 against it, and they hit the ball hard against that pitch over 50% of the time, 53.3% hard hit rate. Not good. And really, he didn't have a good pitch this season. Velocity wasn't down drastically. His location was just awful. If you look at the heat map on the fastball, which is, the more you throw it, the hotter it would be, the brighter red in that location. The graph will show us the heat map on his fastball is right down the pipe. It's just, he was serving them up to people this year, which again, all of this is to say, these are reasons not to sign him, but there is so much upside in Severino with the velocity still being there and at the age he's at. I just think that there is a chance that this was just, for whatever reason, an absolutely horrific season, and maybe he can get back to being a much better pitcher moving forward. I think there's still a little bit of optimism there. I wouldn't love the idea of him being counted on. To me, it's sign Severino to be the 3rd starter you add. Whereas Ryu, if you have a really good number 1 that you add in free agency, if you add Yoshinobu Yamamoto, then you could afford to maybe shop a little bit lower in the tiers and get a Ryu in the mix. Severino, even with Yamamoto, I don't think it's enough to have addressed your rotation that way, because there's a case to be made that he should only be signed for a minor league deal where he might get a solid roster bonus if he makes the team. I mean, that's how bad he pitched this year. I think there's going to be a team that's going to take a shot on him. I mean, you imagine if you're a Pirates or a Nationals or one of these teams that maybe isn't expected to do much this season. I guess the Pirates have a little bit higher expectations than the Nats, but maybe we call it Nationals, Royals, Athletics, whatever it is. One of those teams could pony up and sign him and say, hey, you're going to be right at the forefront of our rotation. He could pitch himself out of that situation by the deadline. But if he's amenable to a minor league deal from the Mets, that would be amazing. Even if you structure the contract where he would get, rewarded pretty handsomely if he did make the big leagues at some point. But even on a low end guaranteed MLB contract, I wouldn't be too mad at it as long as the Mets added enough around him with some of the other moves that they make in free agency. Now, speaking of a Yankees starter who didn't perform this year, but this for different reasons, Frankie Montas. He needed shoulder surgery, so that's why he missed all but one appearance this season. He did get back on the mound in September. Scoreless, was a 1 1/3. And you saw the velocity was down in that start, but not drastically. And it's too small of a sample size to make any clear judgments based on what we saw in that one outing. What I will say is this guy was really good in 2021 and 2022. He pitched to a 3.37 ERA across 32 starts for the Athletics in 2021. That was 187 innings pitched, struck out 9.96 batters per nine, gave up less than a home run per nine, just solid across the board. Then 2022, he pitches to a 3.18 ERA and over 100 innings with the Athletics, is traded to the Yankees, all of a sudden falls off a cliff, and then this shoulder injury starts to rear its ugly head. He's heading into his age 31 season. I think he's worth the gamble on an incentivized contract. Shoulder injuries, very tough for pitchers to come back from, but there is that upside that he showed in 2021 and the beginning of 2022 where maybe you find something. I feel more comfortable, I think, with Montas than Severino, just based on how bad Severino pitched this year when he was healthy. But with that said, I wouldn't be surprised if someone went the other direction on that and just said, hey, Severino's heights have been better than Montas's, and he's not coming off a really serious shoulder surgery. That's a really tough injury for a pitcher to overcome. Now, the last two names to discuss before we get into Lucas Giolito is Tyler Mahle and Vince Velasquez. These guys are coming off Tommy John surgery that they got this year, though, so they're not going to be available at the beginning of next season, and that makes it tough to sign them. I figured I should mention them because they are technically bounce back candidates, but I don't know if it's really worth the flyer this year. Maybe in the next free agent class, those guys will be worth it. But for now, I don't even know who signs them. And there's a chance they don't get signed. There is a chance that maybe some team finds some value there where they want to bring them on a minimum contract or something low and let them rehab with them and hope that maybe they do become something during the season near the tail end of it, I would think. Now, though, we will discuss the best bounce back candidate, in my opinion. One that I think a lot of you probably would not have been open to at the beginning of this show. But after hearing what else is out there, maybe you will come around to Lucas Giolito. I'll explain what he could offer in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. All right, we have finally gotten to the portion of this show you've all been waiting for. This is where I try to convince you that the Mets should sign Lucas Giolito this offseason. Here's the good part, right? Just turned 29 years old in July, so still relatively young. And he pitched to a 3.79 ERA with the Chicago White Sox this season. That's my case. Here's the problem. He didn't just pitch for the White Sox. He got traded to the Angels at the deadline as they were trying to go all in around Shohei Ohtani. And then it was so bad in his month and change with the Angels that they decided to just stick him on waivers for any team to claim his salary. He goes to the Guardians. Disaster there too. Look at the breakdown of his year. He gave up 41 home runs this season, which is a bad number. 21 of them came between his 12 starts with the Angels and Guardians combined. The other 20 came with the White Sox across 21 starts, which still isn't great, but certainly shows you where he really let those stats get away from him pitching down the stretch of the season. He added an entire run and change to his ERA. He ended up finishing with a 4.88 ERA after having a 3.79 ERA through those 21 starts. Now, that was across 184 and a third innings pitched. The year prior, it was also bad for Giolito, 4.90 ERA and 161 and 2/3 innings pitched. So it has been a while since he's been a dominant pitcher, although he did strike out over 200 this year. The thing about Giolito that I like is, for one, the age. Two, he still has swing and miss stuff. He was in the 70th percentile for whiffs. So he's still missing bats. And it's not like there is a really long time we have to look back to find a run of success for Giolito. What he did before the deadline was a very successful year. It's just what's happened, actually right before the deadline. I think he had a couple of clunkers too. And then just after the deadline, it was an unmitigated disaster. Still, this is a guy that has the upside to get under a 4 ERA again and be a solid number 3 if everything broke right. And even if it's, just a mixed bag, some good, some bad. He's still probably a quality number 4 starter. He certainly is, based on just experience and what he's done in the game. He's a better pitcher than David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Jose Budo, and Joey Lucchesi. I don't think there's any question about that. Now, at his worst, he can put up numbers as bad as anyone. But at his best this year, he was still solid. And I think he is a bounce back candidate that you can dream on a little bit. Not that he's going to be some lights out game 3 starter for the Mets next year, but he could work himself to a point where he's considered for such a start. And he at least does enough of the things that you need out of your starting rotation members. And that's take the ball every 5th day and eat up innings. He's going to do that for you. He's going to get some strikeouts. It's just a matter of, can he be more effective in the zone? Can he give up less home runs? And those are questions going to have to answer next year. But he did have a 3-year stretch that's not too long back from 2019 through 2021, where his ERA was consistently around 3.5, and he was a frontline starter for the White Sox. Compare him to the other names we discussed today, and I honestly think it's a no-brainer. I think he is the best bet of this group when it comes to bounce-back arms the Mets could add in free agency. Now, with Giolito and really any of the arms we discussed today, I think they all sort of hinge on getting that number 1 starter first. So that means having Yoshinobu Yamamoto to pair with Kodai Senga, or signing Aaron Nola or Blake Snell, or trading for Corbin Burns or Shane Bieber or Tyler Glasnow. To a certain extent, Jordan Montgomery, but it'd be hard for me to look at this offseason and say, oh, they got Jordan Montgomery and Lucas Giolito. This rotation's ready to make a deep run. I think they need to make sure they nail that first signing and they get Yamamoto. And once they do that, I think they're able to say, all right, we went with Giolito as the opening option. And what I think Giolito would provide the Mets is he'd give you a guy that you could trust to stay healthy, which is big. That's important, especially at the beginning of the season. A guy that has upside to pitch to a sub-4 ERA in that 3 or 4 spot in your rotation. And he gives you time where you can look at the David Peterson, Tyler McGill, Joey Lucchesi, Jose Budo. The guy is in, AAA with Mike Vassell and AA currently, or at the end of this season, I should say, with Christian Scott and Dominic Hamill and Blade Tidwell and Tyler Stewart and Joander Suarez. Like, there's a lot of different options that are at the Mets' disposal when it comes to depth arms. And if any of them can establish themselves, at the deadline, you could be looking at a rotation that doesn't even have Giolito in it or need him. But you also could see a scenario where Lucas Giolito actually does revert back to his former self and is still pitching in another contract here. I'm only talking about a 1-year deal here, where maybe he is great and maybe he does help you and potentially is a guy that is your game 4 starter in the playoffs next season, which is not the worst thing in the world. I think of the options we discussed today, Giolito has the highest floor and potentially the highest ceiling. Outside of maybe, I don't know, Severino might have a little bit of a higher ceiling, I guess. Then there's Frankie Montas, who is such a question mark, but he's interesting. And I think the floor on Hyunjin Ryu is close to the floor on Giolito. I think Giolito is a better bet as far as being able to stay healthy, just because he's so much younger than Ryu is. And Ryu is still, coming into his first full year off Tommy John. But those are the types of arms that I think you get if you're not entirely dead set on winning this year. And I don't mean that you're phoning in the offseason. I mean, there is a middle ground that you find where you put a team together that is good enough where if those young players actually become fully realized at the big league level, you got a team that is ready to roll. And I think that's what some of these moves would mean for the Mets. Whereas if you go all in and then those young players don't end up filling those roles for you properly, you could have a letdown and once again have these guys on bloated salaries who are sort of wasting away on your roster. So I think that is maybe the case to go with the bounce back candidate, but you can't bet on too many bounce backs because a lot of these guys that sort of just show us what they are. And for the last 2 years, for the guy that I think is the best of this bunch, Giolito has showed to be a pitcher who's going to pitch to a ERA north of 4.8, and that's obviously not what you're looking for, particularly from a middle of the rotation on. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I'm recording some of these episodes early this week, so I will acknowledge that if there is some newsworthy things, this could get out of order, but the plan is for tomorrow's show, which should be Thursday's show, I will be grading the Mets just their trade assets overall. Guys that could be moved this offseason, guys who are untouchable but could hold great value. I'm going to go through the 40-man roster, also a couple of prospects, and just basically share what the Mets have to offer if they do venture into the trade market this season. It should be a lot of fun. Make sure that you are subscribed if you're watching on YouTube. We're trying to make a push to 10,000 subs, so appreciate all of you. Hit that subscribe. Follow wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to become a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan and follow the show at Locked On Mets.